something feels different. And I don't mean screens or attention spans or whatever people usually point to. I mean something underneath that. Something about thinking itself. It's hard to focus now. Like your mind doesn't want to grip onto things the way it used to. You sit down, work through a problem or a decision, or even just an idea you're curious about, and the answer feels foggy. So you reach for something, a phone, a search bar, AI, and you really never quite finishing forming that thought on your own. And this feeling, it doesn't feel worse. It just feels less yours. And there's a reason thinking feels this way. We're wired to make things easier. That's not a flaw, that's survival. We find a shortcut, reduce the friction, get the same result with less effort. And that instinct built civilization. Tools, systems, machines, every generation finds ways to do more with less. And for most of history, that worked. Because the tools still needed us. They handled the labor, but we still did the thinking. AI is different than any previous technology. It doesn't just make work faster, it does the thinking for you, the reasoning, the figuring out, the part that used to be yours. Think about how we used to have to wait for things. You wanted to know something? You had to go find it. You had to look it up. You had to sit with it. And if you wanted to understand something, you had to hold on to it in your head long enough to process it. And that wasn't wasted time. The confusion wasn't like a bug in the system. It was space. Space where something actually formed inside you. And now that space is closing. Not because we're lazy, not because something's wrong with us, but because the world stopped asking us to wait. It just gives us the answer now, sometimes before we've even finished asking the question. The struggle was never the obstacle. The struggle was the training, our grit, and our identity forming. And a lot of us are skipping straight to the answers now without noticing what we're giving up. I mean, think about an aha moment, that feeling when something finally clicked. When you've been stuck on a problem or confused by an idea and suddenly it all makes sense. And we talk about that moment like it's magic, like it just hit you. That aha moment is actually neural connections in your brain being formed in real time. Think about that. And when you sit with something hard, when you get stuck, when you try and fail and try again, your brain is literally building new connections, pathways that didn't exist before. And that's not a metaphor. That's what learning actually is. And here's the thing about that process. It requires the part that we don't like, the frustration, the confusion, the moment where you're staring at something and it just doesn't make sense. And that discomfort isn't in the way of understanding. It is the understanding being built. And if you use AI, it removes that entire process. You ask a question, you get a clean answer. You hit a wall, you prompt a way around it. And you never have to sit in the not knowing long enough for your brain to kick in and work to solve the problem. And so you get the information, but you don't get the know-how of how to come to that conclusion on your own. You don't just skip the struggle. You skip the part of you that was being built through the struggle. And I think about students who use AI for essays. I mean, they can recognize good writing. They've seen it, they've submitted it, but they might not be able to produce it because the skill of writing isn't in knowing what good sentences look like. It's in the thousands of bad sentences you wrote first, the ones that taught you why they didn't work. And that's where the ability lives, in the failure, in the friction. And when you skip that, you end up with a strange gap. You know what quality looks like, you just might not be able to make it on your own. And that gap is getting wider day by day. And people sometimes push back on this and say, look, we've been using tools that think for us before. We've used calculators, search engines, spell check, and those didn't destroy our mind. They didn't affect us. So why is AI any different? And to be honest, that's a fair question. But I think the distinction matters. A calculator handles the arithmetic, but you still have to decide what to calculate. You still have to set up the problem, understand what you're solving for, and the thinking is still yours. Google gives you sources, but you still have to read them, evaluate them, decide what's credible. And again, the thinking is still yours. Books give you ideas, but you still have to engage with them, argue with them, let them sit in your head long enough to become part of how you see the world. Calculators, Google, books, they all still require you to do the thinking. But with AI, it does the thinking for you. That's the difference. AI doesn't directly support your thought process. It almost directly replaces it. It gives you the reasoning, the structure, and the conclusion before you've even engaged. And a lot of people are not collaborating with it as a tool. They're receiving a finished product and passing it off as their own. And I felt this myself. I'll try to actually dig into something, research a topic, and sit with it long enough to form my own thoughts and views. I notice myself reaching for the shortcut, not because I'm stuck, not because I can't find the information, just because not knowing kind of feels uncomfortable now. And there's a poor pull towards just letting AI take control, help me work through a problem or idea. And every time I give into that pull, it gets a little easier to give in again. And that's not laziness. That's just a core muscle weakening. And here's the thing. AI landed in a world that was already optimized for exactly this. Think about the environment most people live in today. Everything is instant. Food shows up at your door within 15 minutes. TV shows and entertainment open the moment you want it. Notifications on your phone deliver little hits of validation and dopamine all day long. And information, just a click away. We've been training ourselves to expect everything instantly, to feel friction as a problem, to feel waiting as wasted time. And AI didn't create this culture. It completed it. It's the final piece that says you never have to sit in discomfort ever again. Not even mental discomfort. And I think about the kids growing up in this, not because they're weak or lazy or somehow different, but because this is the only world they've ever known and will ever know. They've never experienced not knowing something for more than a few seconds. They've never had to wait for information. They've never had to hold a question in their head long enough to actually develop a relationship with the idea. And when AI gets layered on top of that, when it becomes the default way to engage with school, with writing, with thinking, you get a kind of compounding effect. A world that was already removing friction now removes the last kind of friction that mattered. The mental kind, the kind that builds you and your personality from the inside out. And let me step back a second, because this isn't a theory. This is happening in schools right now. Think about this. A teacher needs to write a lesson plan. They're overworked, maybe underpaid. They have 30 students and no time. So they prompt it, and AI helps write out the lesson plan. Now a student has an essay due. They prompt it, AI writes the essay, they clean it up a little, submit it, and the teacher now needs to grade 30 essays. They're exhausted. They have a life of their own, a family. So they take the easy path, and they prompt it. And AI gives them and their students a well-written feedback on their work. Now follow that loop. AI writes the lesson plan, AI writes the students' responses, and AI evaluates its own writing. This creates a system that's almost talking to itself. And the student in this case is just the person passing the information without any real thinking. And I'm not saying all teachers or students are using AI, but for the students who use AI to write an essay and get an A, what do they feel? They don't feel proud. They don't feel like they've accomplished anything. They feel nothing because nothing happened inside them. No idea formed, no argument clarified, no perspective shifted. They performed a task and got a grade. That's it. And they didn't do anything wrong, but they feel nothing because it wasn't their idea to begin with. And 2 weeks later, they can't remember what they wrote. Not because they cheated, but because they never had the idea long enough to own it. And sure, it starts with one essay, but stretch that over years, over whole education, and soon enough, it's the way you engage with every question, every problem, and every decision in your life. So what happens to a mind that stops forming its own thoughts? I mean, at first, realistically, probably not much. You're still functioning, still producing, still getting by. But over time, something shifts. You start to notice that your opinions don't feel like yours. You have views on things, but you can't really trace them back to anything you actually thought through. They just showed up. From a summary, a search result, an AI-generated answer that you never questioned. It is not just your opinions. It's your voice, the way you would have said something, the weird angle that you would have taken, the thing that made your thinking yours. And that all starts to flatten because you're not building ideas anymore. You're just receiving them. And when that happens, something else goes quiet. The filter, the thing that you used to push back when something didn't sit right. The feeling inside you that says, hold up, I need to slow down for a second and just think. And that feeling that caused you to slow down, it was built through friction, through sitting with hard questions long enough to find your own thoughts and viewpoints. And at some point you realize that you're not sure which thoughts are yours anymore. Not because someone put them there, but because you stopped doing the work that would have made them yours in the first place. And that does something to you, because when you don't know what you think, you don't really know who you are. Your identity isn't just your name. It's not your job. It's not where you're from. It's your perspective. It's the way you see the world. The opinions you actually earn by thinking through them. The things you believe because you sat with them long enough to know they were true. And when that starts to slip, something else goes with it. Your confidence. Not the loud kind, but the quiet kind. The kind that lets you walk into a room and know where you stand. The kind that lets you disagree with someone without a second guessing yourself. The kind that comes from actually knowing your own mind. And without that, everything gets a little shakier. Decisions feel harder because you don't trust yourself to make them anymore. And you start looking outward for answers that used to come from inside. And the worst part, you can't point to when that happened. There was no moment, no big loss, just a slow fade. Almost like a quiet bleed of the thing that made you feel like you. So where does that leave us? Not with an answer. I mean, I'm not going to tell you to go delete your AI tools and go back to encyclopedias. I mean, that's not realistic. And honestly, I'm not sure that's even the point. The point is that some of us have stopped noticing. We were taught to fear being wrong, fear being confused, being stuck, and those feelings were the enemy, the inefficiencies to eliminate, the obstacles standing between us and the answer. But maybe the real danger was never being wrong. Maybe the danger is never being confused again, because confusion is where growth happens. The struggle is where the self forms, and the friction is where the mind actually gets built. And when you remove all of that, when you optimize it away, when you make thinking as frictionless as everything else in modern life. You don't get a smarter person. You just get a smoother one. One that moves through information without ever being changed by it. And AI will give us speed. It'll give us accuracy, efficiency, and we'll take it. Of course we will. But every time you outsource a thought, you give something up. Not the answer, the ability to arrive at one. And that's the cost no one's talking about. Not what AI gives you, but what it quietly takes from you.